Yeah, thank you, Raghu, Sagar, Srinivas ji, and the entire Park team for inviting me to present this topic on the searching for alternate careers. I think this is a very pertinent topic, especially at this time when there's a lot of young people out there who are looking for opportunities beyond the beaten path, in that sense, you can call it. Right? These were not opportunities which we would think of when we graduated from, like I graduated from IIT. Now it's been 16 years since I graduated, right? So we didn't have such type of opportunities or these ideas. I think this generation is very fortunate in that sense to uh, know about all these opportunities, and it's very important that you're doing it while you have students who are undergoing their program, so they can make the right and informed choices. So the way we will go about doing this is I'll speak for about 30-35 minutes, and then we'll take up questions. So while I speak, I think let me go through the presentation first, and then we'll pause towards the end. So keep your questions in mind, and then we'll take questions towards the end, where we will have a show of hands, and then we'll ask each of you to, ask your questions. So let me start with the presentation, which I think tries to capture the different aspects of the whole space, which I tried to put up there. Okay. I hope this is visible, right? So let's start. So I put it as choosing unconventional career paths, right? And particularly, I'm going to speak about career in public life, and we'll come to what public life is. But broadly, when I say public life, I mean anything which impacts public at large. Right? So this is I'll take you through a presentation which shows you the different opportunities in this sector. Okay. So as Sagar was telling about me, I thought I'll put it up there so that all of you know what I went through in life to reach where I am. But so the first reaction would be, okay, some of these names seem relevant. I have heard of them, right? But it could also seem very messy. That why did this guy have to go through all these different things? So he seems to be a very confused guy. So you can take it both ways. So one way to think about it would be an experience. One way to think about it would be that I have taken a very convoluted path, while there could be more obvious direct ways of choosing. So why this is important is there are different, I take it as a way where I have got a very diverse experience. So I did my schooling at the Bharatiya Bhavan schools in Hyderabad. Then as it's typical at that time. So I wrote my JE in 2000. So what happens is, as you know, if you can rewind back 20 years, if you are good at math, then you choose engineering. So that was also what I had chosen. So I wrote the JE. I got into computer science at IIT Bombay. One of those guys who didn't choose placement at IIT Bombay, not because like people like Sagar and others there who have not chosen it because of having some other ideas in mind, but a very typical mindset. If you can think of Telangana 2 decades back, was that you have to go to the US. So otherwise your life is not fulfilled. So that was the reason I chose to go for a master's abroad. And I chose, I got into the University of Washington, which is in Seattle, computer science. So Seattle was very famously known at that time for Microsoft because it was the headquarters of Microsoft. It still is the headquarters of Microsoft. But after my graduation, I joined a very little known company in India at that time, Amazon.com. So this is uh, at that time a fairly unstable company, I would call it. This was 2006 when I joined them, and they were still working on their web services, and I was a part of that, building their backend for that. Very exciting job, because this was something which was highly technical, building something world class, resilient, and very novel at that time. Having cloud services at that scale that Amazon was thinking. I worked there for 3.5 years. Before I joined Amazon, I took a brief break and volunteered in South America. I'll probably come to it later if it is needed, but that was my first foray into social sector. So I volunteered in a small country called Suriname, and then I came back, joined Amazon. I worked there for about 3.5 years. I called it quits. I came back to Hyderabad, my hometown, and started something called Youth for Seva, the Hyderabad chapter of Youth for Seva. And then me and with other founder, we expanded Youth for Seva across the country. It was primarily a platform to engage young people into volunteering. Now, this is very significant if you see the kind of journey I've gone through so far, is that, of course, good educational institutions, that's true. A corporate experience, very useful for me. Even to this day, I value what I learned at Amazon. And then what Youth for Seva exposed me to is my day work would be going to government schools, going to government hospitals, working in slums, working with people with disability and things like that. So this was gave me a very good exposure till then. Good education, corporate exposure, ground exposure through Youth for Seva. About 5 years into Youth for Seva, what I realized is that it's about time I go back to school. I'm a bit intellectually motivated person in that sense. So I decided that I'll go back to school and I will study once more. Particularly, what I realized is most non-profits in India are limited by their impact and are limited by their scale. So I thought picking up good management education is important. So I went to the Indian School of Business, India's top B school, and did my MBA there. Post ISB, again, decided not to sit for placements, and perhaps the only one in the batch to choose to work for a non-profit, in fact, start a non-profit. We started something called Vision India Foundation. The intent of Vision India Foundation was to groom bright young people and engage them with public policy and governance. So, and then we have now transformed Vision India Foundation into the Rashtraam School of Public Leadership. So we are now a full-time, I mean, in that sense, an academic institution which intends to create the future public leaders of India. I'll come to that towards the end of the presentation. This has been my broad journey. What I think it gives me is a lot of exposure across the spectrum, right from grassroots all the way up to the policymakers, right from India all the way abroad, management, education, corporate exposure. So with that, I have been able to see and how different career paths pan out. So we'll go there, but before that, I just wanted to give you a big overview about what are the challenges and opportunities. Of course, this could be an unending list, but something which immediately came to my mind, I put it up there. So first of all, when we think of, I mean, from an economic perspective, right? That's the first thing which comes to our mind. So it's always said that we have a low per capita income. But then if you see the opportunities there, obviously we are the fastest growing large economy in the world, right? So then people claim the population is a challenge, right? There's too many people competing for too few resources. But then at the same time, we are also one of the youngest countries in the world. So the way we create opportunities is also a big possibility for us, which the advantage which most other countries don't have, right? A very young demography is what we have. The institutions in this country are weak. We are still struggling to make them stronger and more, I mean, that in sense, robust, efficient. But at the same time, if you see, we are a very vibrant and restless democracy. Given that we are a very young country, as well as in terms of demography or our age, so we are trying to, I mean, fix most of our issues, and we are very restless about them. So there's a lot of hope there as well. But I think these are about the external aspects. I think the big issues are the last two also, that it is something within us, right? Perhaps our education system, perhaps what we have been going through, we have a very low self-esteem, and this I see in also a lot of bright students who are probably attending this call, as well as many other people I speak to, who are perhaps the most fortunate in the country, but have a very low self-esteem and self-confidence. So that can we do it? I mean, we have always been beaten. We are always copycats, right? We don't aspire too high. So that's been there. But at the same time, it's changing. I've also seen it change since the last 11 years I've been in India, and I've closely tracked young people that self-esteem and the global image is changing as well. Finally, I think one very important point, and I'll come to it towards the end as well, is that the more and more we are disconnected from our past. If you start seeing that India was born in 1947 or 1950, if you call it, we are disconnected from the thousands of years of our history. So we have kind of lost all that knowledge, tradition, the wisdom which has come from there. So we are disconnected, and that has come post-independence. We have kind of taken our institutions, our political leaders took a stand that it's a fresh start. It's a break from the past. And I think that has been our big handicap actually, right? While we have had a time-tested knowledge tradition, we were at one time one of the richest countries in the world. That's why the rest of the world searched and came for us. So disconnecting ourselves from our past has been our biggest problem. So, and that is where we have been struggling. So this is also what we try to fix at Rastram, trying to connect the civilizational past to the modern challenges and look for solutions which we could adapt to the current times. Okay, so this is where we are. But let's go back, and because I'm talking a bit about careers in public life, um, I know all of you will not follow the schedule, so I put it a typical day at work, because when you get to work, you'll probably be following some schedule, right? In this sense, I just put it out there, typical thing which people would be involved in. So this is what you broadly do. But what happens is, though we may tend to think that I am independent, I don't care about the rest of the world, almost everything which we do in our day-to-day life is connected to, in some sense, the other institutions in the country, public institutions, public officials, policy, governance, all these things are connected to what you see over here. For example, okay, you wake up and you brush your teeth, right? So where is the water coming from? You switch on the lights, where's the electricity coming from? Where does the gas supply come from? Where you throw the garbage, who collects it? If you take a bath and then you go out of your home, lock it, right? So who's determining the legal ownership of your home, right? Who takes care of the roads? So these are, if you see what I put up on this slide, what you will realize is, at least when I was studying engineering, I never used to care about any of these things, right? None of this matters, right? It's all about my subject matter, what I study, how I ace my exams, get into good placements, and the job is done, right? So we seldom think that almost every second of our life is actually determined by a larger institutional framework of the country. You can call it the state, right? In that sense. So, and unless we fix it, right, our lives are not going to get better. So there's no way you can say, I don't care, okay, or chalta hai, because everything comes back. Everything is interconnected. What you give, you get back that, right? So that is very, very important to understand, right? If not anything, finally government will take tax from you. So you are contributing in some way, so you better get involved if you want to improve the quality of your life. Okay, so I'll come to this. So this is a, I mean, probably you will see this picture. I mean, what you see in this picture is a part of your daily life, at least pre-COVID. This would be something which you would see very often. Okay, so if you see this picture here, you could probably see a lot of different issues. For example, okay, you see those wires dangling, fairly common, those light poles from which you can see those wires dangling. That would have electricity wires, that would have cable TV, that would have telephone, that would have internet, that would have so many other things happening there, right? And then it's a big mess there. You can see the scooter parked on the pavement, right? That is meant to be for walking of pedestrians. You see the pavement broken. You see there are street hawkers, probably they're on the street. Are they unregistered? We don't know. You see some other, I mean, you see people trying to cross the street. You see different types of vehicles there. There's a lot of different, I mean, you see three-wheelers, two-wheelers, right? Then you see some hand-pushed carts. You see pedestrians trying to cross. This is a very common picture in an Indian urban setup. All of you would have definitely seen it. Okay. Now, this is where the complexity arises. How do you go about changing such a complicated, interconnected problem statement? That is where a lot of us turn away and then go into our shells and say, okay, let me make my private life better and let me be away from public life, right? Because these problems seem too complex to be solved, because they're different agencies, right? You could have the municipality involved, you could have the electricity department involved, you could have the central government involved in some ways, right? You can have the state government involved, you could have some civil society organizations getting involved. So there's so many different agencies involved. All of their incentives have to be aligned. You should be the big change maker in the room who would get these stakeholders together and drive this change. A lot of it is also behavioral, so you have to work with people. So it can become very intimidating for a person to think, how do I go about changing this, right? But that is also the excitement of the whole space, because you have seen and you have probably definitely read about how many cities have transformed themselves. For example, just yesterday the Swachh Sarvekshan results have come out, and as you all know, Indore was rated for the fourth consecutive time the cleanest city in the country. If you go to Indore, definitely you will, I have seen, right? In terms of the sanitation and hygiene, is definitely one of the best in the country. You can definitely validate what you see in the rankings. So there have been people just like you who have gone about changing the situations like this and involving a lot of different stakeholders. So things are possible. So the challenges are also great opportunities and are field of excitement. At least that keeps me excited. That keeps me, this is like what I live and breathe, right? To solve problems like this and involve a lot of young people in doing so. So this is actually a very exciting space as well. Okay, so let's get into careers because I've spoken enough about the problem statement, enough about what it is about. So the way you should go about looking at this is that how do you um, um, I'll give you different frameworks to actually go about and solving this problem. Okay, so first thing you should all think about is that who am I? Okay, so am I a problem solver? So that's something like an entrepreneur, right? You are obsessed with the problem. Like if you see a problem there, you think no pedestrian should have safe walking spaces in the city. I'm obsessed about it, right? I will do what it takes to solve that problem. So there are some people like that. Okay. There are some people who are careerists, right? So they are not in this entrepreneur or an activist kind of a mentality. They're like, I will choose a job which can help me solve such problems. So I'll align my career with the problem statement. So there are people like that who would probably choose to be working for the civil services or people like that, right? So they are less risk averse, but they want to align their career with this also. So they are the first ones you can think of are not very paycheck oriented people. The second ones are more paycheck. They want a paycheck at the end of the month, right? And the third ones are more satisfaction seekers, I would call them in some sense, right? So these are people who would get involved part time, right? So they want outcomes, but they'll probably donate money or they'll volunteer on weekends. The people like that. So you should try to see which one are you. So there's no good or bad about this. There are all types of people, but we need to understand where we lie. That's very important. Okay. Once you understand that, the other thing which definitely all of you should meditate upon and reflect upon is what is the nature of the problem you are obsessed about and you want to solve. Okay, is it an ideological or a social issue, right? So if that would mean that if you see the previous I mean the picture I had shared, so that could mean something like you are having illegal shops on the roads, right? Something which needs that law, people don't abide by the law. Okay, so there is something which makes you break laws. It's a mindset issue, right? So if you want to change that, or people don't follow laws when they cross the road, people don't follow other regulations. So, or it could be other things, right? It could be on caste, gender, other things, discrimination. You want to work on that, or people don't have a sense of hygiene, something like Swachh Bharat, right? You would want people to follow basic sanitation and hygiene, right? So this is a ideological or a social issue. Second thing could be you want to implement a law, you want to bring about a law, right? You think that no, plastic should be banned, right? There is a lack of a law and I would want to bring about a law. It's not a social problem. It is a lack of a law and I want to bring that about. This is the second way of a problem statement. The third thing you think is no, laws are in place, but the implementation is poor. There's so many different regulations and laws, but somehow the local municipal councillor as well as the municipality staff, they are not putting the implementation in place. So the government has sanctioned that for every 300 feet or 200 feet, there should be a dustbin or a trash can, but it is not being put up there. So I would want to make sure that is there. The government has said that they have implemented a law about that there should be no encroachment on pavements, but it is still there. So how do I implementation of policy is the challenge, right? So that is the third way to think about it. That there is the law is there, but it's not implemented well. The fourth is a more fundamental approach. The fundamental approach is we have not understood the problem itself, right? We need to go back to the whiteboard and think about on research on what is the problem. Okay, for example, we have not understood how to plan cities well. It's a research problem. City planning is poorly done. It is not research based. Indian cities have to be planned differently. Can we rethink, right? Or other issues like I'm saying about judicial delays, many other things where there's a lot of research has to be done. So you should choose the nature of the problem also. Okay. Available paths, and this is why all of you are listening here, is that there is a path on politics. Okay. So before this, we are starting, we had an informal conversation about who all want to be in politics, right? So the way I would categorize it, it is high risk, high return. Okay. Anybody who's understood a political career would resonate with me. A long gestation period. Okay. So when I say that, it means that you will take a lot of time to be impactful. Okay. Typically, it is said that you should be either the PM or the CM to make any significant impact in politics. That's a political executive. Right? So it is one of the paths. It is a very high impact path, but it's also comes with a high risk and it takes a long time as well. Okay. Then there's a bureaucracy. A lot of you I know choose to write the civil services, the UPSC exam. Right? So it is public service, but it is not domain specific, correct? It is a general public service. So you would probably start as a district magistrate or a district collector. Slowly you go up the ranks and you come to the level of a joint secretary where you also draft policies and all the way up to secretary level. The different paths in the bureaucracy, right? So the bureaucracy has its own career trajectory. Right? But the challenge, of course, as all of you know, is a high barrier to entry. I think about 9 lakh people choose to write the exam, and a lot of them want to be in the IAS, or even if you think, so a few hundred people get a service of their choice. The barrier to entry is very high. But once you get in, you don't get fired. Actually, very few do. So it's like a stable career for life. There is very little, I mean, in that sense, external motivation to do things. It's all has to come internally. Unlike the corporate where you also have carrots and sticks, here it's all about internal motivation to perform. But it is a guaranteed safe retirement for you, and then your children will have an awesome life. Everything is taken care of. So that's a bureaucracy. Then there is academic research. The ones who want to be in research. So these are the ones who provide, what should I say, input to the policy makers as well. Right? So it is for those who are intellectually stimulated. Right? They want to crack very tough problems. Right? Again, relatively secure career because it's also based on a paycheck you will get at the end of the month. Right? Then you have a very fairly stable campus setup where you stay and you teach. Right? But I think the impact is huge as well because you can change the direction of thinking of society. So you can, because you are seen as those intellectuals who can guide society. So what you write, what you profess, right, your research outcomes will change the way society thinks in the long run. Others don't have the capacity of changing the minds of people as much as the faculty in our academic institutions have. And all of you will attest to this, that you would have some favorite professors who has inspired you a lot, right? So you have the year on year, because you are always engaged with young people and training them, you have the capacity of changing their thought process, and what you write and profess and say is very impactful. Okay. There are other paths. There's an activist path, right? Where the Anna Hazares of the world, where you can mobilize masses for a larger cause. You can work to get a law passed. So these are the street fighters, right? So you work for public interest litigations. The RTI Act came out through such an effort, right? The activists were involved in getting NREGA implemented, right? So these are activists. right? A lot of activists are also into politics, but I just wanted to keep it different because a lot of them are not. Then there is a social sector. This is a very popular path people choose, that I choose a problem statement, like my village has a problem of water, right? So I will help in ensuring that there is good water supply for both the farmers as well as for the people in my village, right? So you choose a problem at a fairly small scale and you try to address all the different dimensions of it. The advantage definitely is there are immediate results, right? You can get started tomorrow morning. You can start going people, meeting people. You can start taking up something and start digging and doing things, right? So you can immediately start seeing results of your action. The challenge, of course, is scale. That there are very few NGOs with scale big. If you can't think of a nationwide impact so easily, and at the same time sustainability, because you're always because you're self-funded in many ways, right? Either through raising donations or some other ways. That you if you stop, things may change again, go back to default. So how long does the outcome sustain itself? So that's the challenge in NGOs, right? And one other aspect is a bit of on the academic side, but not as much, is to be in either a think tank or in a consulting. So if think tank is more on the academic side or consulting is more on the corporate side, right? So you assist the government or influence the government in implementation of a policy. So this is like a fairly stable career trajectory. So when I say consulting, it's like the big four, right? You have the KPMG, you have the Ernst and Young, so you have the different PwC and them. So these are the ones who work with the government in helping them implement policy or helping them design policy. That's a consulting part. Or the think tanks of the world, which you have heard of, right? Where you are researching on issues of public importance and advocating changes. Okay, so I hope you got this whole different paths and the different issues I have mentioned, right? So, and all of them have give or take, right? This, sir, what is the best path, right? There's nothing like that. Each of them would have something you give up on and something which will give you good returns as well. So it is, you have to choose, as well have to choose who you are. You have to choose the kind of problem you want to solve. Not everything can get solved by different tracks, right? For example, a consulting firm perhaps could not solve an alcohol addiction problem in a Hyderabad slum, right? So you'll have to probably be an NGO for that. But at the same time, if you have to implement the Swachh Bharat Sarvekshan, right? If you have to do the ranking of cities on cleanliness, then it's a consulting firm. That's not something an activist or an NGO could do, or a politician could do, or I mean, a research organization could do. So there are different ways, right? But the quintessential question which every BITS person or anybody out there would ask is that kitna deti hai, right? What is the what do I get? Right? Because it is not nothing wrong about it. This is a fairly natural question to ask. That how are the financial returns, sir? I have dependencies on my family who are dependent on me, and otherwise want to do things, right? So I just want to be. So of course, this is not. This is just a ballpark. Okay, that's not something literally what you take up. This is something which you can have as a ballpark, right? Of course, consulting firms are paying the highest. It is a large growth. Eventually, if you become a partner, then you get a share of the profits as well. So that is definitely pays you the highest in the long run. An activist is definitely at the lowest rung, because activist is those guys who just are inspired and they go on the field and they fight for causes, and public funds them for that, right? They do their crowdfunding, they take up causes, they fight for it. Right? And somewhere in between, you will have academia, bureaucracy, NGO, right, and politics. You could contest that saying कि नहीं sir, politics में बहुत पैसा है, but that is definitely not true, right? I think if you go around meeting politicians, you will realize that it is very, very challenging, because you're always in public life. So you always have to keep spending for things. NGOs are there, academia, bureaucracy, stable careers, right? Eventually, I think, yeah, but you kind of get the drift, right? It's don't take it literally, but that's how it is. That's how the if you care about your financial returns, this is how the broad hierarchy is. Okay. Now that we said about who am I as a person and what is the nature of the problem I'm trying to solve, right? So you could try to identify where. So this is a framework, right? I'm trying to give you frameworks to decide. So okay, I think I'm more of a, for example, me personally, I'm a problem solver, right? So, and at the same time, I am a more of an intellectually oriented person, right? So I'm more a researchy type of a person. So where do I end up? I mostly think about starting a think tank, if you can call Rashtraam that. It's not actually there, but it's somewhere there. Or an academic institution is what I decided to start. Right? So this is where you broadly are. But there are problem solvers out there. So there are, for example, if you take Arvind Kejriwal, some of you may like him or not like him, but something which he did about 10-15 years back was he fought for the RTI Act among many other people. So he was more about the lack of a law. He was a legal activist or a social activist. Right? So, but eventually he realized that just this is not enough. He jumped into politics. That's where his implementation of policy is very, but his by nature, that person is a problem solver, right? If you take up Anna Hazare, he's more of a social activist, right? He's a more of a he's social reformer. He worked in making his village a model village, right? So you have heard of all these different people who do different things. So, so these are how, and people jump across. It's not that once you choose, you're somewhere there, but people jump across, and typically in the first few years of your career, you have an opportunity to choose. There are people I know who choose to go into the bureaucracy to understand how the system works and then come out of it and get into politics. So there are a lot of different. So, but given this framework which I have put up on the screen here, it's very important for you to think. So where do I be there? So, sir, I think I have to still do a full-time job. So I will probably support an NGO, or I will help in setting up an NGO or something like that, right? So you'll have to choose where you are. This is very, very important. Why this is important as well is because if you don't decide on this, that's what is the problem with most of the people graduating from premier institutions in the country, who the society thinks they are so well endowed. They have all these different opportunities. But why are they switching jobs every 6 months? Because we have not understood, first of all, ourselves, and we have not understood what we want to do. Okay, I'll come to it later. But if we don't understand these two things, we are jumping all over the place and we are very unsettled, and then we don't have any impact. So it's very important that you start thinking about these things early on. We'll move on. All this is fine, sir. Tell us what is the opportunities and how can I start now? Right? When I'm a 22-year-old, what do I get to do? Okay. So if you choose of the different things I've put up there, if you choose, okay, I want to be in politics, sir. So how do you get started? So there are opportunities to be a legislative assistant. I think some of you know about it, or you can look up. So particularly you work with an elected representative in drafting bills or writing their speeches, right? Or you could be a development assistant to an elected representative where you help in working in their constituency on development issues, right? You are more in the political realm, right? Where you are interfacing with people, solving their grievances, right? You could also choose to be an OSD, it's called officer on special duty, or a personal secretary to a minister, right? Or you could now a big open spaces, political campaign managers. I know some of you would be aware of this, right? The most famous is Prashant Kishore. Again, you may or may not agree with him, but he's one of those entrepreneurs who chose to enter into politics as a political campaign manager. Eventually, now he's into full-time politics, right? So that's how his trajectory was. But you can see legislative assistants have been there. I know a lot of people who work with elected representatives in various forms of assistance, right? Then the bureaucracy, right? Of course, UPSC is the way to enter. There is no other way of entering. There are a few lateral entries. Hopefully that will increase in time, and we'll have opportunities to also enter directly at the joint secretary level, maybe 15-20 years into our careers. But at the moment, a lot of it is still through UPSC. But where do I get started now? So there are opportunities, various fellowships are there. State governments have floated fellowships for young people to be into as kind of consultants to the government. You could also choose, a lot of Niti Aayog has openings for young fellows who can go. So you get a feel of how the government works by being in those offices and seeing things. So it can give you an idea that, oh, do I want to be in this space? So what I'm listing here is important because, sir, I think I am this and I think I want to do this, but I'm not very sure. So the answer is, how do I get started? So you get started by getting yourself exposed to opportunities which I'm listing down here. Okay. Then there's a social sector, right? So you can start volunteering, and I think where you are currently at Park is also one opportunity where you will definitely be involved in a lot of social work, right? So working at local NGOs, social enterprises, multilateral agencies. When I say multilateral agencies, I mean the UN, the World Bank, right? UNDP, the Asian Development Bank, all these different agencies who are big non-profits like the Gates Foundation, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, the Clinton Foundation. They're global in that sense, right? So right from your local village level all the way up to global level, there are a lot of social sector opportunities out there. And then there are also ones which are on a cross between social sector and business, which are social enterprises, impact funds, social impact funds like IntelliCab, Will Grow, Avishkar. Lot of them are there now, right? Where you can be an investor, but an investor into social businesses, or you could work for a social business directly. There are a lot of ones working on water, a lot of ones working on health. I'm pretty sure you know about them as well, or you could look them up. Right? Then there is media and IT, because it's also having a huge impact, right? So you could work on developing apps which work for the government, right? Or the government can use it. I know a lot of, companies which are developing products for the government, right? Just for example, we are using Zoom for conducting this call, right? But at the same time, there are a lot of people trying to crack it, right? How do we make a good, secure app the government could use for doing many different things, and provide public service delivery to people without, at a very seamless way, right? At the same time, there are policy advocacy portals which people have Hak Darshak. There are so many other things which people have started, which will take government services to people, take government information to people. Then there are campaign management firms, also goes all across politics as well. But ones who manage campaigns, social media, I handle the social media of this, my company does this, right? So there are a lot of companies which are providing services to the government as well. Okay. Okay. So now, given that I gave you so much information and I am also running out of time, but what I have realized is the problem with all of us who have so much information, so many opportunities, such a huge network of alumni whom I can connect to and do so many different things. There's a big gap between knowledge and action. Okay. And this is where I want to come down to. This is a problem only you can solve. Even after hearing to this entire presentation and knowing so many different opportunities, many of you will still not take action, because there are two things which broadly, I just put up there is, you imagine the world's best archer, right? Arjuna, in spite of being the best warrior at his time, he was still not willing to take the step, right? He needed that answer. So this is the problem with a lot of us, immensely talented, but will never take a jump. So for this, it's very important to have self-awareness and also understand the purpose of your life. If the two axes on the framework I was sharing there, who am I? That is Swabhava or self-awareness. And what is the problem I'm trying to solve? That is Swadharma, right? If I want to put it that way. So it's self-awareness as well as your purpose of life. These are questions only you can answer. And what is holding you back? A lot of people have graduated from IIT Bombay along with me, or University of Washington, or the Indian School of Business. I have met so many people. All of them think, yeah, you go ahead, I'll come back behind you, I'll do it with you. But they have not followed, right? Because of not understanding who we are, we have not understood this gap between knowledge and action, right? And we have to identify what is holding us down and break free from that. And the work has to be internal. This answer will not come from outside. That is where the Indian civilizational wisdom is very important. You will have to delve into reading, you will have to delve into some practices, and that is the only way you can solve, right, this problem. And the one important quote from the Bhagavad Gita, what Krishna tells Arjuna, he says, Yogaha karmasu kaushalam. Because don't get overwhelmed by the different things I have told you. At the end of the day, whatever you choose to do, if you pursue excellence in that, that is yoga. That is self-fulfillment, right? So whatever you choose to do it as a pursuit of excellence. And that is what. So even if you are making a safety pin in a company, oh, corporate, sir, is a bad thing. Social sector is a good thing, right? Politics is bad. Bureaucracy is good. This is not good. That is not good. That's not true. Whatever at the end of the day you decide to choose, just choose to do it in the best possible way. And that is what is will transform you and will transform society as well. That is where I want to stop. And this is what is also our philosophy at Rastram. We are building a school of public leadership where we want to groom bright young people to be in public life, and particularly in domains of academia, social sector, politics. That's where we are grooming. It is school coming up in Sonipat. We've already started. You can check it out.
Mute
I will ask some.
Yes, yes.
I'll ask some of the questions that we received, sir.
Sure. Okay.
And then we'll take up some individual questions as well.
Sure.
Sir, one of the questions was, is there a need for technical skills in the social sector? For someone interested in pursuing a career in social sector, does it make sense to start right after college? Those were two questions.
Yeah, see, again, whoever asked this question, I think it a lot depends on your personal situation. See, this is not a prescription I can give. That's why I gave you a framework to think. If I tell, because all of us have our own personal constraints, right? So I don't know what your family dependency is, right? What maybe you have a lot of flexibility, maybe you don't have. For example, in my case, I worked a few years for the corporate sector, so I was able to, in that sense, get a corporate exposure, also save some money, and then come to the social sector, right? A lot of social sector today pays very well, right? So you could choose to get started in the social sector immediately, but work in a bigger one where you have a fairly decent pay, rather than going and starting your own NGO where you'll have to raise money yourself. So financially could be a constraint. That's one part. Technical skills definitely are very useful. One thing true about the social sector is that there is not too much of capacity building happens on the job, right? But because people jump into it with a lot of emotion, they feel for a particular problem. They feel that in this neighborhood government school, there is no good English teacher. So let me go and become a teacher and start training them. That is what you would think. But then once you start doing it, you start realizing the challenge of, I'm not trained to be a teacher. I don't know how to manage a classroom. I don't know how to, solve the personal issues which the students are facing. I'm unable to connect to their personal lives. So many things you will face, and nobody particularly trains you on that. You could be a very good engineer, but once you end up in a fifth standard classroom in your neighborhood school, you'll have a big problem in delivering impact. What I'm trying to say is that how much ever skills you can pick up before you jump into the sector is very important. And while being in the social sector, the more and more you're always aware of building your own capacity, it is very important. Because the passion can drive you for some time, but after some time, it will plateau out. The impact plateaus out, because unless you develop yourself, right, the impact also will taper out. What I'm trying to say is that try to build your own personal capacity before you jump into this sector, as well as after you're in the sector, also develop your capacity. That is one of the reasons I went back to school, in terms of went back to ISB to study something. But the financial situation is your thing. I don't know about that. So you'll have to take a call according to your financial needs as well. Okay.
Sir, next question. What are your views on the contribution of the Indian Administrative Services towards social impact through their service?
See, that's a very tough question, because I know a lot of you are UPSC aspirants. And,
sir, you can go on, sir.
see, definitely, I put up there, I put up in the slides as well, that you would see the, see, in terms of impact, definitely imagine you are a 25-year-old person who makes it through, and you're put into as a district collector of a district of 20 lakh people, right? That's huge. That's huge. Some districts are what, 60 lakh or something like that. Like for example, Prayagraj. Right? So at an age of 25 years, you have tens of lakhs of people whose life you can influence. That doesn't come in any other career. It's very, very difficult. So that way it is a great start. But that being said, it's at some stage in your life, it becomes a very clerical job. particularly after you finish your district collector tenure and you get into different secretariats and you start working on other issues, your connect with the people reduces because you are not meeting them as much. Your job is more in that sense secretarial or clerical in doing things. So and at the same time there is no external stimulus, right? You are a careerist. The biggest thing, the problem with the services is that there is no stimulus. Why should I take any risk? The whole incentive is not to take risk. The whole incentive is to just maintain status quo. And it's time bound promotions, right? So after a few years, you'll take a promotion, you'll take a promotion, you'll take a promotion, eventually you'll retire. So there is no motivation like either the social sector or into politics or in the corporate sector to go and do anything different. So I see people start with amazing careers, but as their careers progress, their impact reduces, their attitudes change, and they become, at that sense, a very clerical and delivering, waiting for their retirement and a settled life. So I think the motivation, if it is there, the fire within you is there, then definitely the bureaucracy is worth it. At the same time, that being said, you are always at the whims of a politician. You have to remember that, right? You may think so that I am not, but what will happen? You may think this guy is lesser educated than me, but then he is the representative of the people. He decides what has to be done, and you go and implement it at the end of the day. So you will always are subservient to the political class. You should be comfortable with that. A lot of bureaucrats are not. So it is said that what the bureaucracy was supposed to be the steel frame that holds the country, whether has become a steel cage. It is stopping our growth in many ways. We have to break free from that. So just to summarize, you have to be comfortable being subservient to the political class. You have to be realistic that initial part of your career will be amazing, but the later part of your career will be primarily clerical in that sense. Lot of what you are able to do yet has to come from an internal motivation, but it is perhaps the most stable of all careers. So that way it's a mix and match. You have to choose. Everything comes give and take. So given all this, you have to make a choice. Yeah, Raghu.
Yes, sir. That's a very beautiful answer, sir. The next question is, do you believe it's imperative to be part of a government organization to make worthy impact?
Do you what?
Do you believe to be a part of governmental organization to make worthy impact?
No. So for example, whatever I've shared, so there's a government and there's a non-government, right? The whole NGO sector is a non-governmental sector. That's why it's called NGO, right? That's not the best definition of NGOs because that's like what it is not. What it is, it's like a social purpose organization also it's called, right? You are choosing a cause and you're working on it. You don't have to be in government to make an impact. But at the same time, I think a big mistake a lot of NGOs make is that they don't work with the government because to bring about scale, right, to bring about a long-term impact at a larger scale, you have to work with the government. That's the challenge which we have. Lot of NGOs, almost if you in the cities, I mean, a total at this point, about 30 lakh registered NGOs are there in the country, right? So that is like one for every 400 people. Of course, a lot of them are defunct. They don't file their returns and all that. But I'm saying everybody who feels for a cause starts an NGO. Yet it is not having an impact because of the things I said. One is the capacity building. One is structuring the organization very well. One is working with the government to scale up your impact. All these things have to be done. So I'm saying that you can always start your own non-profit working on a particular cause, but to bring any impact at a larger scale, you have to work with the government because the government is the big gorilla in the room, right? That is where all the money is. That is where the mandate is. The mandate for change is with the government. The mandate for change is not with the non-profit. What the government cannot do, the non-profit will try to change, right? If the government is unable to send a good English teacher in your school, then the volunteer will come and teach. But ultimately, the government should send a good English teacher, right? You can't be volunteering in the 2.5 lakh schools of the country, right? So what I'm saying is NGOs are very good for immediate short-term small scale impact. But anything which has to do with scale and long term has to be government or working with the government. Yeah.
Sir, next question is, when was the first time leaving a highly lucrative job for social sector felt worth it?
So for me personally, okay,
Yes, sir.
the question exactly. Raghu, can you repeat that?
When was the first time leaving a highly lucrative job for the social sector felt worth it?
Oh, felt worth it. Okay. That's a good question. Actually, I think the first 1 year after I came back from the US and started Youth for Seva in Hyderabad, I gave myself 1 year to just try out and think, even if I'm worth it, can I do this? Right? Because you may think you can bring a change, but I'm telling you, you will be very disappointed when you hit the field, because people are not waiting for you to come and change them, right? So you will face a lot of roadblocks. You will face a lot of personal kind of confusion, that am I doing the right thing? Because the rest of your friends and colleagues will go about doing amazing things, and they'll put very fancy Facebook photos, and you are feeling confused that am I doing the right thing? There'll be a lot of peer pressure, there'll be a lot of family pressure. So I think I gave myself 1 year. I took permission from my parents for about 1 year. At the end of 1 year, I definitely felt it was worth it. Because as I said, one good thing about the social sector is the change is immediate. For example, I started working in a nearby low budget private school. A charitable organization was running a school in my colony. So, for example, very simple thing like career opportunities, like what I'm doing now. If you take a session like this, it will totally open up their mind. Otherwise, if you go to government school and ask a question today, most of them will say teacher, policeman, or things like this. Someone whom they have seen is most impactful and most powerful in their community. That's their highest aspiration. Their aspiration is not beyond that. So if you could increase people's aspirations, if you can make them imagine bigger things, right? The change is immediate. So I think after 1 year of being in this sector is when I felt that what I'm doing is can transform lives, and it is worth giving some more of my time for this sector. That's where I felt, but I gave myself 1 year to make that decision.
Sir, one of the questions from participant Dr. Shashi Chawla was, how do you make money out of a social cause? How do you make it a stable business?
Okay, so there is, it's very, I mean, you are kind of, I think, asking more about social enterprise, right, or social businesses, because non-profits are typically funded through donations. There is no way, you can't do a business in a non-profit. Non-profit has to be charitable contributions, funneling it into a cause. But if you say a business, I think you are saying a social business or a not-for-profit company, a Section 8 company. There are so many examples out there. I think all of you can research about this or write to me. For example, sustainability, right? I think all of you have heard about this. People are using recyclable material for making products, right? For example, just some time back, Rakhi went by. Now people are making biodegradable Rakhis, or the Rakhis have seeds. After you wear the Rakhi, you put it into soil, and then a Tulsi plant will come out. Very simple ideas, right? And they are a rage now. If you can think of Khadi, for example, Khadi was a product which nobody used to touch even 10 years back. Today, the business of Khadi India is in tens of thousands of crores, right? All over the country, if you include Khadi overall as a business, right? So you are directly working with the handloom and the weavers, and you are coming up with products which are in that sense also comfortable and trendy. So there are so many examples of products and services which people have started, which also have a social impact and are profitable. So I think it's just about searching, but then you are structured as a company to make us a company. And but I'll just extend the question. The challenge you will always face when you do a social business is you don't know how much of my business is social and how much of it is profitable, because you're always in that line, right? If you go more towards the for profit thing, then you will have to compromise a bit on your social impact. If you go more towards the social impact, you have to compromise a bit on the profitability. So that is where again the leadership of the company matters a lot. How do you decide what to do, what not to do? So, but I think the opportunities are plenty. There is no doubt about it. And if you just search social businesses in India, you'll get a lot of examples.
Sir, one more question was, how big is the CSR sustainability management industry, and what kind of new features can we expect from companies like Goodera, Benvity, and Volunteer Match?
Yeah, so there are a lot of this social sector consulting firms which have come about, like Satwa, Goodera. See, okay, now I don't know how many of you will appreciate this, because I don't know if you have the maturity to understand. Social sector in India is becoming very corporatized, and it is actually very disappointing for people like me, and a lot of alumni of good institutions like the BITS have contributed to this as well, in the sense that the Companies Act was passed in 2012 and the CSR funding was opened up. So now there is some few thousands of crores of money which can come to non-profits. What is happening is more and more through corporate money being given to non-profits, the very nature of non-profits is changing. Okay. For example, if Raghu here wants to go and work for his village, which is facing a water shortage, and he decides that I will revive the village pond, right? The water pond in the village he will revive, right? And he's going and asking for a corporate grant. Do you think you will get a corporate grant? It is very difficult, because they will ask you things like who are the beneficiaries, what is the return on investment, can you submit us reports of the impact, right? So the sector is becoming very, very corporatized, but that is not how Anna Hazare has thought of transforming his village. Anna Hazare has brought about the village community. He has said, Shramadan, all of you contribute to your voluntary labor. We will go about digging the village pond on this auspicious day and then dedicate it to the temple deity and make the village better. He's not worked on corporate grants, but the sector, because of corporate funding, is becoming very, very, I mean, in that sense, corporatized, is being managed in a very corporate way. So ultimately, social work should be community driven. It should be driven by the people themselves. That's not happening. And we should be very conscious of these things. I'm not saying it is bad, but if you're not conscious, you will run your non-profit in a very corporate way, and the end beneficiaries will not see the impact in the way it was intended to be. So you have to be careful about that. So I'm saying opportunities are tremendous because the CSR money is flowing in, foreign money is flowing in, a lot of people are contributing, technology is there. But at the same time, be very conscious that don't bring in business management principles to run non-profits.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very well said. Very well said, because, you know, at the end of the day, you will find even the NGO started listing in the stock market and they'll give you quarterly results. Okay, that is one reason why we have stayed away from any corporate funding up to now, at least.
That's a very fair point. Now there is a social stock exchange coming up.
Correct.
It is happening is lot of people who are into policy making, consultants, like a lot of you will be consultants. Somebody has given a proposal saying that let's have a stock exchange for social sector. Now, how do I measure the impact of a village pond, for example? Do I count the number of fish? Do I count the number of birds who will come there? Do I count the drop in village temperature? No, right? You will count it as so many cubic meter of water is saved and so many households have got so much water. That's all. It will be very centric to human beings. It's very centric to what you can measure. There is so much immeasurable thing, which or the aesthetics, the pleasantness, the feeling of being in a village environment, all these things, the reverse migration, these all cannot be counted. So when you make it into a organization run on outcomes and listed on the social stock exchange, you will be driving outcomes in a very different way. The valuations will be very different. So you will have to be, I'm not saying it is bad, but if you are not conscious, you will make a lot of mistakes.
I mean, you will start introducing corporate metrics and similar such stock market metrics to measure the performance.
Yeah. So I think again, I want to go back to the last slide which I had put up there. See this entire sector, my big mission is to de-glamorize it. It has become too glamorized. I came back in 2009. That's when this movie Three Idiots released. Some of you would have seen it, right? So you all of us have this fancy image of Amir Khan in Ladakh training young children on some rural technologies and all that. Okay, so it is good. The sector has become more popular and all that, but at the same time, there's a problem of it becoming too glamorized as well. At the end of the day, why are you in this space? All the spaces I spoke about, it is for public life. It is for transforming people's lives and transforming your own life. It is not to start winning some awards and start becoming very famous, getting listed in the Forbes 30 under 30, all those things. Okay. So make the mission very inside out rather than outside in. That's when you will be very impactful. Otherwise, you will face the same problems like in other sectors. This sector was supposed to be a sector where it is driven by, as I said, Swabhava and Swadharma from inside, not from outside. So make it a sector like that. Dedicate your life for a particular cause so that you can become a better individual. Right? Don't just chase the glamour here. I think that is a challenge which is going to happen very soon. A lot of you people will do it. I know a lot of you will come asking for recommendation letters so that you can get into a good B school. All those things happen in the sector. I'm very, very aware of all these things. But if you genuinely want, I have been for 1 decade in this space. So I can tell you a lot of people who started and stopped, but genuinely the ones who made a change and have been impactful are the ones who have been in this sector because of being motivated from within and not from without.
Sir, let's take a couple of questions from the participants if we have any, or else let's end this.
Okay, any questions you can either unmute and ask, or you could type it down and I'll try to address.
Deepanshu, you had a question?
Yes, hello Shobit sir. So I am Deepanshu Gupta and VAF alumni, GGY 19. So it has been always learning when we talk to you and when we listen to you, be it GGY days or the National Youth Event Day or today. So my first question would be, is GGY going to happen one more time or not? Or I am the last seller?
Okay, no, so this is a very individual question, but I'll just expand it because Deepanshu has asked it. So we have something called a Good Governance Yatra. I have not listed the VIF programs in the whole presentation, but I think you should have a look at them. Why? Because it is particularly meant for young people who want to broadly be in the space of governance administration. It's an 8-day program where you go across the country and you look at grassroots projects, how they're implemented. You meet the policymakers, you meet the village elders, you meet the different people to understand how the changes have happened. It has been fairly successful. We have done it for about 16 plus states have been covered in the 6 editions. This year probably is going to be difficult because of COVID, because we can't get 70 people on 2 buses, take them to so many important high profile places. It's going to be challenging. Any place. Someone's asking what is GGY. Just look up Good Governance Yatra. But I'm very sure that we want to continue it whenever the opportunity comes. So whenever the COVID situation eases, we'll have that. So have a look at Good Governance Yatra on our website. You'll know about it.
Thank you, sir. So, talking about Rashtram, I wanted to ask one thing. Like, I have seen that in our college curriculums or other higher institutes curriculums, we have courses that are mostly inspired from either European universities or American universities. To give you an example, like there is a course in which is called Science Tech Modernity. So that starts from Nicholas Copernicus or Greek philosophers. But science existed prior to that also. So at Rashtram, as you are creating Indic knowledge-based courses, so how are you inculcating that fundamental thinking, and how are you basically creating those courses in Rashtram? And if you could give some examples, like I remember Purv Paksh in our Delhi.
Yeah.
Like, so can you give some examples on?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for asking that, Deepanshu. So when I say that at Rashtram, we want to create self-aware and civilizationally assured public leaders. The two things. Self-aware is first of all understanding yourself, who you are. Okay, and I touched a bit about it in the presentation as well. I think this is the biggest loophole of our current education system, right? Nowhere do we start by understanding oneself. Everything is assumed that from the external world you choose, and you choose your career path and you do all these things, right? Who am I? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And no better civilization in the world than the Indian civilization, which has delved into this to the ultimate depths, right? Yoga and all those things are one aspect of it, but any philosophy you take up, everything in this civilization is not for immediate worldly outcomes, but transcendence, right? How do I become someone bigger or beyond myself? How do I reach the divine in whatever I'm doing? So that is the entire attempt at this whole civilization. The knowledge systems are designed like that. So this is very, very important. So whatever I choose to do, how do I choose to do something which is beyond myself? So being self-aware, we have a lot of courses at Rastram. The entire first term, the 6 weeks at Rastram, is dedicated to understanding yourself, and we delve into a lot of yoga philosophy to help you understand yourself. That is the first part. The second thing is when you said, I mean, a lot of these knowledge systems which we are disconnected from, those civilizationally assured. Why I said that is because if we disconnect ourselves from our past, which is what the education system has done to us, we have lost the entire knowledge system which the civilization has produced. Right? Thousands of years of knowledge has been lost. For example, public leadership is what we are discussing currently. I'm recently reading a book on Krishna called the Krishna Rajya. It is talking about, if you look at Krishna not as a divine person, but as a statesman or a politician or a military strategist, there is so much to learn. There is so much to learn from his life, right from his wars with Jarasandh or the Kurukshetra war, or how he built an entire city like Indraprasth, this Delhi now, or the entire city and the community of Dwarka, right, in Gujarat. He moved from Mathura to there. How he is a strategist, how he's a politician, how he's a philosopher, how he's a very good friend, how he's a very good mentor to Arjuna and Yudhishthira, how he's established India's most powerful kingdom, right? So there is there. If you look at Arthashastra, how did Kautilya as a political science professor build the biggest and the most powerful kingdom which this country has seen through Chandragupta Maurya, right? So there is so much to learn, and we have just disconnected from all of that and are trying to solve the problems given the limited knowledge we have today. So that is very, very important, and we'll have, that is where Rastram comes in. We are trying to dip into our knowledge systems and trying to get knowledge out of that and apply it in the current context. So, and there is no other institution in the country trying to do something like that. A public leadership from the Indic knowledge systems perspective is not happening, and that is what we're trying to do. And a lot of information is there on the website, rastram.org. You can check it out. Thanks, Dipanshu. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, we have a question from the audience. What are your views on preventing bureaucratic corruption, as those are extremely difficult to investigate and bureaucrats have no risk of getting fired?
Okay, so see, I'm not an expert at these things, so but I'll still try to address it. What I think where we miss it is, a lot of us think that with the coming of technology, corruption will reduce, right? Okay, faceless transactions, Sahil is saying that. Fine, right? So for example, now I can pay my telephone bills online. I can pay my property taxes online. I can pay my income tax online. So there is no middleman. There is direct benefit transfer. My pension, my Narega wages is coming directly. My LPG subsidy is coming directly to my bank account. Definitely, technology has reduced leakages. That's true. But at the end of the day, if the beneficiary and the person who is giving the benefits doesn't handshake, you can't reduce corruption. For example, if you jump a red signal today morning, right, and the traffic policeman says, right, that this is what is the challan, you have to be challan 1,000 rupees for breaking a signal. You can just, if both of you collude, and you say, I'll give you $200, you don't cut a receipt, you leave. It's nobody, there is no technology in the world which can prevent a collusion when there is there, right, in terms of corruption. So that is why what I'm saying is technology and having more such ways reduces such type of issues. But unless you work on people themselves, unless you create people of higher moral fiber, you can't solve this. And in the entire for the UPSC aspirants out there, there is very little of this. At the age of 25, you will go to Mussoorie as into the Labasna Institute, and you think that now I am right. You forget that you are a public servant. You forget that the people are looking up to you for providing good service. You start in the whole Raj, right, the British Raj system, that you are the lord of the people. If that comes in, none of what you can do will help, right? For example, corruption doesn't have to be only monetary. I will not pass your file. I don't like you, I'll sit on your file. No power in the world can make me sign on this file. You can't fire me because it's not easy. I will find some loophole. That is why you will see these issues happening, right? There are a 3.5 crore pending cases in the Indian judicial system, right? If you multiply 3.5 by at least, I'm saying 2 families, 10 people, 35 crore people of this country are affected because of a slow judicial system. That is 1/4 of the country is impacted by this. Forget about the economic impact or the educational impact or the lives getting destroyed by it. But you will not pass that file. You will not, right? And how will you stop this? This will only stop if you develop the moral character of people to go at a higher level. I'm here in public service. Okay. That should be the mentality. I'm here for national service. How does that come about? So what I'm saying is technocratic solution is limited. It has to be an internal transformation also. Both go hand in hand. And that is where I think what we are missing out. That's why I keep going back to again and again, you'll have to connect to the knowledge systems of the country, because that is what will tell you if you are in a position of power, how should you be? You are a public servant at the end of the day, right? So you have been given an opportunity in life to serve people, which others couldn't get. If that is your mentality, you will behave very differently. So this is the education system, the training which you get in your services. This is what will change people. It cannot be changed only through technology.
Can I add a
Yes, sure, sir. Yes.
something here?
Right.
See, what he is saying is absolutely spot on, because it is all the attitude of the people. Okay, you have to change the attitude of the people to be honest. You can't expect anything in whatever may be the system if the attitude is not right. I'll just give you an example. See, you go to a shopper stop here. You have cash registers, absolute technology, everything is coded, barcoded, you just scan it, the billing comes, there's no hanky-panky, nothing. But you will find hundreds of people, the staff inside, who are trying to help you choose this, that, and all that. Okay. Still, in the end, when you come out of the gate, there is a beeper and there is a security guard who checks everything. And despite all this, you will find somebody putting something in the bag and going out. It happens every day. Okay. Now you go to a foreign country where the attitude or the moral value is much higher. There you will find only 4 staff members, 5 staff members managing an outlet, where in India we have 100 staff members. Okay. Look at the difference. It's a scale of difference. Okay. Now there are just 4 counters. You walk in with your bag. You don't have to deposit the bag anywhere. You walk in with your bag. Everywhere there are cameras, all right. But nobody tries to cheat. Nobody expects you to cheat. You come to the counter, bill whatever you have billed, put it in your bag and walk out. Nobody asks you anything. Nothing gets stolen. Nothing gets stolen. Okay.
So I'll just add to that, sir. I think it's not about the West or India, but that's true broadly what you're saying. But you will also see this difference between the educated and the uneducated in our own country, right? For example, I have spent a lot of time in Northeast India, where education has probably not reached every village. The simple people there, for example, I reached there after some of the floods in Arunachal Pradesh. What I realized is when the government was distributing blankets, unlike what I see in cities here, people don't go grab it and all that stuff. So they know I deserve only so much for one family, one blanket. They will take it and they'll go home. If some of them get lost, they'll come and give it back that they've taken more. So what I am stunned is that the native wisdom of this country is actually very rich.
Absolutely.
Now the education system which we have gone through, we always are looking what is in it for me. How do I grab more? So when right, the more you get educated, the less of the corruption which we'll have. It's actually opposite.
The corruption of mind
of this country know the best on how to circumvent the rules.
Correct.
So the biggest scams are happening in the highest of the corporates.
Correct.
Or at the highest levels of office in public life.
Correct.
Not happening at the lower level. Your local kirana shop will still give you something on credit. He will not. He will just trust you that he'll come tomorrow and pay for the bread you have taken today.
Absolutely.
It is actually very inverted, and we'll have to introspect. Why did we come up with this situation? Yes.
No, this is absolutely the truth. You go to the village, you will find none of this. The security aspects are there, but people trust everybody and they exchange money, they change whatever it is. Yes. They even leave the houses open and go.
The biggest reason why demonetization didn't have an impact on this country was because the rest of the country runs on credit, right? So people said, okay, I'll pay you tomorrow when I get the money, right? And all these things, the whole village economy is running, even though they don't have cash in hand. Everything is working on trust. While the cities were having huge ATM queues because there is no trust. Everybody wants to get paid immediately. I'm just saying that we have to understand the country in its entirety also.
Correct.
Okay. So Raghu, yeah, over to you.
Sir, we'll take one last question. Sir,
Right.
there was one question regarding, sir, can you please advise on internal, do you suggest any book, any video or any course from Sahil Gupta?
Oh, see, I would not risk that chance, but I see there is enough of literature out there. I personally practice a lot of yoga, meditation. I've been initiated formally into that. But see, I closed my slide with the Bhagavad Gita, right? I think that is one book any public leader in this country who is worth his mettle has read it. Okay. And it is timeless. It has been read across time, across the world, and everybody finds value in it. So I think that is a fairly good start. But there are so many commentaries by so many people. I was stunned actually very recently. Like for example, I was reading about Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Right, he wrote a commentary on the Gita called the Gita Rahasya. I read about Sri Aurobindo. He's written about the Gita. Mahatma Gandhi has written about Gita. Swami Vivekananda has written about it. Anybody, Chinmayananda has written about it. Everybody somehow finds that book to be highly inspirational. So that could be a fairly easy start. Take anybody's commentary on it and start reading. But there is enough of material out there. Again, I'm saying everybody is very different. So I think you have to choose which one. Someone is asking which commentary of the Gita. I think Swami Chinmayananda is very good. Very, very action oriented for young people like you. So Swami Chinmayananda's commentary on the Gita is very good. He has audio lectures as well. So you could use that. Okay, Raghu. Thanks.
Sir, it was a very thoughtful, informative and mesmerizing session, sir. I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Park and BITS community for inviting me over. I had a great time. For those who missed it, hopefully they can catch up with the online video as well. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
God bless you.